Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Cohen, and on today's episode, I have Dr. Nick Thompson. Dr. Thompson is a practicing vet based just outside Bath in the southwest of the UK. He is also the current president of the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society and has been a raw pet food fan for more than 20 years. Nick, thanks so much for coming on for the episode for today.
Gary, it's great to see you. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. It's nice to be able to spread the word among more people. I normally do talks for kind of dog groups up and down the country, and they're usually up to about 50 or so people. Recently came back from Munich, where I was doing a talk at the ESVCN, the European Society for Veterinary and Comparative Nutrition, and we had about 300 or so vets, vet nurses, and nutritionists. But to be able to talk to thousands of your fans is really, really great. So thank you for that.
No problems. Yeah, and so what I'm trying to do today is get to speak to you as a vet. So last time I got to speak to Rowan Sanderson from Bella and Duke, but I'm really fascinated to actually speak to a vet who's on the front lines and seen pets and patients and having to communicate this information that you've got with pet owners who are listening today. So I'm really looking forward to trying to ask some questions that I'm thinking pet owners listening to this right now are going to be thinking, this is what I'd love to ask Nick. So my first question for you then is, within the veterinary society or just in the veterinary world, is raw feeding an accepted practice amongst most vets right now?
It's a good question. I haven't any hard figures, but within the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, and just to plug the rfvs.info is the website, Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. We have about 115 members. We've only been going a few years, and the numbers are increasing each month, but we have that small number of vets. Now, obviously, that's not every raw feeding vet in the UK, because we're a worldwide thing. So that would suggest that actually there aren't that many who are active in their advocacy of raw feeding. If you had to ask me to guess on numbers in the UK, I would say there's probably maybe 200-300 vets who are very sympathetic indeed to raw feeding, if not advocating raw food. Maybe they like the idea, but they haven't got the time to look into it as a new discipline, and therefore they refer to me or some of my colleagues within the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. So therefore, that would lead me to say, how many people are how many vets, vet nurses are anti? And I think that the number is even smaller than that. Probably a few dozen are actively anti-raw, and then everybody else is kind of on a spectrum between those two. So it gives you an idea that it's not, it's still a very new concept within veterinary medicine, and there is some resistance, but more and more things are improving. I can remember maybe 10 years ago being at vet shows where people would come up and actually give you a really hard time to your face. That does not happen anymore, and quite often when you've got a vet show, you've got the people selling instruments, you've got people selling kibble, you've got people selling all sorts of veterinary pharmaceuticals and paraphernalia within the profession. The raw food manufacturers who are there tend to be pretty well accepted especially by the younger members of the profession. So I think it's a new and exciting area of veterinary medicine. I'm really optimistic for the future.
Yeah, just the reason I'm asking too is because I was just thinking, particularly when it comes to pets and animals, we kind of think of pets who are more carnivorous, that they would probably have, from how many years they've always had raw food in a way. And I was just
Mm.
thinking it's probably maybe raw food even from an education point of view. I don't know if it's in your syllabus, if it's even brought up as a topic. So I was just thinking it may be more accepted in the veterinary world than some other fields, but it sounds like it is. It's a hot topic. It's edgy. It's sort of a big discussion thing amongst vets themselves.
It's pretty. It's generally not taught within the syllabus within the vet schools. I was just hearing that there are some vet schools in Europe where it's just beginning to be taught. Just came back at the weekend. I was in Helsinki at the University of Helsinki, where they've got a very strong research group who are doing to work there. There's a wonderful researcher called Anna Heim Bjorkman, and she really has put out more raw feeding research than all the others put together, basically. And I'm really keen to support her. She's got a lot of data that is just waiting to be turned into a good scientific papers. So, and she's always in need of money. In case any of your followers are wanting to put money into raw food research, because we need it. We need the research. Anyway, just come back from Helsinki, and they've got a very strong team there, and so they do get some exposure. But most vet schools, they are still pretty suspicious of raw food, unfortunately.
Okay, so in your personal case, what got you so interested in raw pet food, and why you feel so strongly that it's a good choice for pet owners to feed their pets?
Sure. Okay, that's a good question, because I can take you through my career. Really, I qualified in 1992 with a veterinary degree, and I also had a degree in pathological sciences from Edinburgh University at that stage, because I knew that I wanted to have a strong research background behind me. And I went into practice, and I was thinking, great, look, I've got veterinary medicine. I can cure the world, and you know, that naive thought that you really have a lot of power in your hands. But within a very short time in practice, I found that there were very many cases who were coming to me where I was frustrated with the tools at my disposal. I had antibiotics and steroids and non-steroidals, and I had kibble at my disposal, and I felt frustrated that there were many more diseases where you couldn't cure, you couldn't get to the real root of the disease, and you had to just placate the disease process, manage the disease process. And so I started looking at homeopathy at that stage for animals. I'd always been interested in it, and so within homeopathy, there's a strong culture of removing obstacles to cure, and I discovered that I recognized in practice that actually nutrition was was a massive maintainer of disease. It was an initiator of disease, and it was an obstacle to cure of disease. And so it seemed logical to move from a processed food model, which is the veterinary model. You're either, the way you're taught at school, and the way, most veterinary practices within the UK, within the States, they are using a tins or kibble. Kibble is the little biscuit that, where you've got the meat and protein and the carbs and the fat all mixed together, highly processed with multiple elements within it. The average kibble has got 14 or more elements within it. It's made from meat meals, Yeah, it's not even made from real food. They don't start with real food in many cases, and so it's it's a pretty easy leap to go. If 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 you go to your doctor, they're telling you to eat, well, a very forward-thinking doctor perhaps would be telling you to eat fresh food and to eat appropriately, to avoid eating and drinking any toxic elements, to be careful to use organic where you can, to eat a balanced diet and eat fresh wherever possible. You go to your vet and they say, here's a bag of this and here's some tins of this. And I think there's a major disconnect between those two, and yet they're both doing a very, very similar job. What's the difference? Doctors treat one species called a human being, and small animal vets treat dogs and cats. Human beings, dogs, and cats are three different. That they are in three different nutrition groups, if you like. Human beings are omnivores. And we are able to be down at the bottom end as vegetarians and vegans. We're able to manage that. We can be in the middle, where eating vegetable and an animal-based diet, or we can move up to the top end. You were just talking about the carnivore diet within the human sphere, where we eat a lot of meat material. Okay, so we are flexible. We are flexible eaters. A horse is a non-flexible eater. It's a herbivore. Okay, but dogs are up at the top end of the omnivore scale. Now, I find that the terminology is not really accurate enough to encompass all the dog species that we do that exist. But within the domestic dog, you can pretty much categorize it at the top end of omnivore, or some people will. Well, it's often described as a facultative carnivore, in that it can be very carnivorous, but also can drop down into eating feces from herbivores, poo, rabbit poo, sheep poo, horse poo, what have you. Anybody who's got a dog will totally recognize that side of things. But then dogs will eat berries in the autumn as well. So dogs have a greater flexibility. On the other hand, you have a cat who is an obligate carnivore. It is obliged to eat meat. Okay, yeah, carnivore, meat eater. But the problem with that descriptor is carnivore doesn't actually say what it means. A dog, and mainly a cat specifically, is not. It's more of a mousivore, a rabbitivore, a birdivore. That would be a more accurate, yeah, because they eat the whole thing. Yeah, more or less. They'll eat ears, they'll eat skin, they'll eat lungs, testicles, bones, everything, the lot. Okay, equally, so will a dog. Okay, so when one says carnivore, you're removing an awful lot of that carcass in that descriptor, which I think is, it sounds like a technicality, but it opens in a very interesting discussion.
And yeah, that's, I guess that is the key thing here. Like you're saying, it's species specific, and even within, yeah. And so even within our typical pets, like cats and dogs, there's a spectrum involved, and dogs can handle a bit more vegetation, whereas cats, it sounds like they definitely can't. It's not really ideal for them. They need to be more in that meat range and organ range and bone range and skin range versus what a dog would do with its digestive system and its how it can deal with it.
Very much so. When I'm talking to clients, I will describe it that carnivores, however you want to describe those, but carnivores, i.e. dogs and cats. Carnivores eat herbivores. Herbivores eat plants. Plants eat soil and rocks. Okay, that's how it goes. And the problem with many of the supplements, the mineral supplements, is that they are essentially kind of they are simply minerals, calcium carbonate, for example, which doesn't go through the transformative process of being assimilated into a plant and then assimilated into a herbivore and then into the dog. They will just take calcium carbonate as a carbon source, for example, and say, right, there's your carbon, your calcium. Yeah, calcium carbonate is a source of calcium, otherwise known as chalk. And so you get bioavailability issues. So for me, the species appropriate diet is ticks so many boxes in that you're providing nutrients in a form that cats and dogs have evolved to deal with over thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. They have evolved into optimally processing and absorbing these nutrients. And so for me, that species appropriate nutrition is fundamental, and it's really easy. I talk to children about this, and they go, "Yeah, we should feed cats and dogs on what they're designed to eat." Whereas, unfortunately, if I speak to my profession, sometimes they'll say, "No, it has to be a scientifically formulated, complete and balanced formulation," and I have a problem with that.
It sounds interesting because it's exactly what humans are going through in a way, with the discussion with all the different ways of eating and dietary choices that people have. And people argue, like, what is the optimal way that humans are meant to eat? But it sounds like you get the same within the veterinary world, that maybe vets haven't decided, like, we know this is optimal for cats or this is optimal for dogs, because then we are talking then that a processed food can come in and say, no, we fortified this food and we still think this actually is more optimal than what we've decided is the best diet for a cat. And it's just an interesting discussion to have then, I think, like, how is that more optimal than what we've decided is actually what a cat should be eating, for example?
Yeah, very much so. I think you're dealing with an artificially created diet that, with 100 years of testing for the levels, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, protein, fatty acids, and what have you, they are formulating such that you get the same thing every day. Okay, that's one of the holy grails of kibble and tinned feeding, is that you have a formulation you feed every day. Yeah, you have an adult maintenance formula. Here's your food. That's it until you reach a senior dog. And for a dog that's kind of 6 to 8 years old, who defined that, I do not know. I don't think anybody really does and can give you good data on that. But feeding a single, unvarying diet every single day is one of the cornerstones of modern veterinary nutrition. And I think that most of the cornerstones are pretty bogus, in my opinion. But I find that one very difficult to understand. So not only are we feeding artificial food, not only are we feeding high carb food to cats and dogs every single day, we are feeding exactly the same formulation every single day. And I don't know of a human nutritionist who would even begin to go anywhere near that kind of extreme, that one has to feed a single artificial formulated single formulation uniformly over an entire adult life, and yet it's considered completely acceptable from the manufacturers of veterinary foods.
And within the veterinary world, I'd be interested too. I'm going to use cats as an example because you might feed your cats some, let's say, kibble or canned food or something, but then they'll go out and hunt some pigeons and they'll eat the whole thing, as you said, like feathers and all.
Feathers and feet and beak and everything.
Yeah. And so is there any concern that vets go, oh no, your cat has eaten 2 pigeons this week? Like we're actually concerned for its nutritional health right now.
No, but they'll say that they would, in that scenario, they'll say make sure you've got a worm on a regular basis, which is fair enough. I don't actually worm my cats and dogs on a regular basis. I will do worm egg counting, like we've been doing for horses for 40 years. Okay, why use a pharmaceutical when you can just do a test? And when we do the testing, the worm testing, we find that month after month, year after year, many of these adult cats and dogs just don't need worming because they don't have any worms, and we just keep an eye on it. So there's another cornerstone of standard veterinary management that, again, I think is needs to be looked at again. I've forgotten the question.
Oh, well, I was just asking, yeah, I was kind of wondering, is there any concern then, like if cats are eating raw food in a way because they're catching their prey, like in a sense that cat is eating raw food that's completely unprocessed because they caught it, and is there any sort of concern then that vets might have, like, oh no, this cat is, for example, eating too many birds?
Not really, because it's pretty standard issue. There are 8 million cats in the UK, and they quite a high proportion of those are hunting, and I don't know, can't remember the statistics. Something like 30 million wild birds are killed by cats. A proportion of those are going to be eaten, and the casualty rate from cats for those birds is pretty low. That's for sure. And what about all the mice? Nobody even knows how many mice are being decimated by cats. So this is being this is how cats are feeding themselves, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. We don't get cats getting nutritional problems, getting blockages or infections. Particularly, it does happen here and there, but it's not a very common thing at all. And yet they're eating very naturally, despite the best efforts of the profession.
Of the pet owner, yeah.
And the pet owner. Yeah.
Sure. So just to run through maybe a couple of benefits then, just like an executive summary. Have you seen anything more specific when it comes to cats and dogs when you convert them onto raw feeding, like a spectrum of just general benefits or something quite advanced that you think pet owners need to know?
In 2014, I did a survey of 79 vets, raw feeding vets from around the world, okay, whose total experience, when we added everybody's experience together, was over 1,000 years between them, okay? And I just asked 8 simple questions. One of them was, what proportion of healthy dogs, gain a benefit when they're moved from a processed food diet, a kibble or a tinned-based diet, onto a raw food diet? What was their estimation? They said about 85% of dogs, when they're transitioned over onto the raw food, show objective improvement. Okay, and then asked the next question was, what about sick dogs? Yeah, they've got skin problems, they've got gut problems, diarrhea, constipation, anal gland issues, these kind of things, or even just squeaking, or just gassy, or whatever it might be. And again, 85%. The estimation was that about 85% of dogs who are moved show at least some benefit. When they were asked what benefits do these 1,000 years of veterinary experience, what are they seeing? They're saying benefits with breath. I'm just going to go from the top of the body down to the bottom. Benefits with cleaner breath, cleaner teeth, less burpy, less windy, less gurgling in the stomach, better digestion, less colitis, better formed stools. It's very, very one of the big selling points for raw food is that stools that previously on kibble or tins have been difficult to pick up suddenly become torpedoes. that you can just pick up easily. It sounds trivial, Gary, and people don't do it for themselves, generally speaking, but it's a big, big, big part of the raw food revolution. Because if for example, if you've had this dog for you've had your dog, for example, you bring it to me and you say, what can I do? The dog is perfectly well, but I've just heard about this raw food thing. I say, this is perfect. Here's the diet. This is how you do it. Go away and see. And if you've been kind of scraping the stool of your dog in order to be a good citizen into a bag for the last 5 years, and all of a sudden you're presented with torpedoes, you're going to love me to death. Forever, simply just from that alone. Okay, no matter that the dog's skin is better, there's less itching, they smell better, their energy is better, they have a better bloom. Just pretty much any health parameter. I have seen every health parameter I can think of improving on a raw food diet. Now, when raw feeders say this, the manufacturers, the profession just say, oh well, that's just anecdotes. Where's your proof? How can you prove these things? And rightly so. It is quite difficult because how do you measure bloom? How do you measure vitality? How do you measure energy? It's incredibly obvious to the owner, but less so to if you're trying to measure it as a researcher, or if you're trying to be critical. It's a good way to say, oh, it's just how can you tell? And the answer is that there are millions of owners out there feeding raw food who have converted, and they're all terrified for the first month or two. They're terrified they're going to kill their dog, and then their dog is happier and more enjoying their food, and they say, why didn't we do this years ago? That is the story that I hear every single day. And within the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society, that's what drives the Raw Feeding Veterinary Society. This continual wave of people saying, my dog is transformed by feeding a species appropriate diet.
Yeah, and this whole show it's got the term biohacking in, which is like N=1 experimentation and observational stuff, and that's exactly what it sounds like is happening with pets here. Is we're looking at the pet as an individual and pet owners can come back and tell you, wow, like my pet's coat's different, it smells different, it's now got these torpedoes instead of this messy stuff on the sidewalk, which is fantastic for my life. Yeah, and I like that what you brought up is because, again, the reason I want to get you on is to sort of ask you questions that pet owners would have. And I think you brought up a good one, is that most people then have that fear factor to begin with. They think, oh gosh, I think this is good for my pet from what I'm hearing from all these experts out there and all these testimonials, but I'm so scared like I'm going to hurt my pet. And it sounds like, so the first thing you're saying to them is, don't worry, it's what the pet's meant to eat, especially dogs and cats. But then... So what is it that you would be, I'm just thinking step one, like what is the first thing that you get the pet owner to do? Do you say, right, pop out to your local grocery store and buy this? Or I don't know, what's the first meal? Okay.
It's easy to do because when I started in veterinary medicine 26 years ago, nobody was producing complete raw foods. Okay. And then about, I guess, 20 years ago, maybe a bit less, 15 years ago, they started there were producers who would get meat and vegetables, minerals, vitamins, put them all together, freeze them, and then distribute them throughout the country. And now there are an awful lot of these companies who are doing this work. And so basically it's very easy. You go out, you go to your local pet store, and many pet stores in the UK and in the States are carrying freezers where you can select complete and balanced raw frozen food. Okay, there are two types of raw food that you can buy. There is just the meat, and that is not a complete meal in my opinion, because you need bone and you need vegetable material. Yeah, there's some contention over vegetable material, but we'll not go there for now. But then, so there are the companies who do just meat. And many of the companies will do complete meals where they've taken vegetables and formulated a diet together. And basically, you just go out and you buy some of this food And you can either go cold turkey. So on Monday you feed kibble, and Tuesday and for the rest of their life you feed the raw food. Or, and this is to a certain extent more for the owner than for the dog, you can just say on the first day we go 1/4 raw, 3/4 kibble, and then we go half on the second day, 3/4 raw, 1/4, and then over to full raw over about a 4 to 7 day period. Cats, on the other hand, are a different story, and they can be very, very, very fussy. A cat, it is possible for a cat to just refuse to eat a raw food. It's not common. What's more common is that they'll take a while to get used to it, and so what can take a dog 1 to 7 days can take a cat 1 to 7 weeks, 1 to 7 months. Okay, so the trick with cats is to take your time and go step by step by step. If you want the detail, there are two ways to convert cats. The first way is the 1%, 2% rule, which is basically you take the kibble and you just add a very small amount of the new food, and you gradually move up as the cat is able to get used to more and more. That's the obvious way of doing it. The other way of doing it is the 2-bowl method, where you just get a couple of chunks or a little bit of the new food and you put it next to the kibble for a number of weeks, so that the cat gets used to the smell and the look of the new food, because cats are very habituated to whatever they're used to. Okay, but if they then see the new food as not being so new because they've been staring at it for the last 2 weeks, you can then start to do the 1%, 2% method. So you've got the straight in with the 1%, 2% and increasing method, or you can go in with the 2-bowl method. And so if in doubt, if you've got a really fussy cat, then 2-bowl method is usually a good way to go for cats.
And
take time.
Yeah, those are great tips for pet owners who are listening here, when they're like, it's the practicality of things going, okay, here's the theory, but how do I actually put this in practice? And I love those practical tips that you're giving there. And so it's I'm just thinking, so when I've never bought it, but if you actually, so you're buying this frozen pet food, do you slice it when it's raw, or do you have to wait for it to sort of thaw? Like, how does that work?
Great question. Different producers produce different formats of raw food. There's one producer that does nuggets. Yeah, you buy a bag, it's got about 55 nuggets in it. You just go plink, plink, thaw them out, takes a couple of hours, and then you feed. Okay, it's a great system because you can be very accurate with how you feed. Other manufacturers produce kind of little 300 gram, either a punnet or just a frozen block. Other producers will produce a free flow mince. You just pour out the amount of food that you need, and then you feed that. There's a UK producer which is producing kind of the raw food is within a sausage skin, and you just take the sausage out, defrost, and feed. So you don't actually need to touch the raw meat, because many of my clients are vegetarian and vegan. Okay, because they're very conscious of this species appropriate diet. Okay, so ironically, they're feeding their dog real meat. Okay, so sometimes that's a good option where you get this sausage. But to reassure your people, you, unless you want to, in which case go ahead, you don't actually need to touch. With the modern packaging methods, the modern presentation methods, you don't actually need to touch the meat. Okay, because that's a concern for some people. Whenever you touch any packaging or any meat, you will always wash with warm water and soap. It's really, really important. It's a stunningly obvious thing to say, but and frankly, you should do it whenever you touch kibble. Okay, because if you look at all the recalls in the States, many of them are for kibble. Yeah, salmonella and listeria and what have you within kibble. Yeah, if you ask people who feed kibble, nobody washes their hands after feeding kibble. Okay, I think you should.
Yes, it's a food-based product. It's just good basic hygiene.
Absolutely. And with raw food, you definitely do it, but you kind of tend to want to do it just because raw meat.
Okay,
it's great stuff. yeah, yeah.
And so we've talked about there's different options when you come to buying it. Is it possible for pet owners to make their own raw pet food?
Sure. It is, yes. However, just as you went to primary school before you went to secondary school, I would suggest get somebody else to do the diet for you to start with for the first few months. Cut your teeth, find your feet with allowing somebody else, a company, to do the hard work for you. Okay, until you get used to it, and then once you've got used to it, the dog has got used to it. The microbiome has re-equilibrated to this new diet, because you get a narrowing and a specializing of the microbiome, as you'd expect, to this much more specialist regime, and you that's how you
Yeah,
do it.
you can work it out from there and then get appropriate
Yeah,
advice.
you would there are a lot of books. Karen Becker has written a great book. Ian Billinghurst has wrote the kind of the original Bones and Raw Food. There are other books by Kimothy Schultz, with a KY, Kimothy Schultz. Another one by let's have a look, Claire Middle. So there are a lot of books out there. You just need to put raw food into Amazon and you'll be able to find a lot of books. Do your reading if you're going to go DIY. Just as you wouldn't fix your car yourself unless you actually knew what you were doing. So equally, educate yourself to know that what you can do, what you can't do, what are the parameters involved, such that you can do it yourself, and then go ahead. Okay. Formulate it together, or go and see a local raw feeding vet or knowledgeable local person.
And do hooves and hives and some of these other chews, are they considered raw food themselves or not?
I think if it's been processed, it's not really a raw food. Yeah, that is to say, if anything's been added to it, I would, or if it's been heat treated, it's not. I wouldn't consider it to be raw.
So these chews that when you get them at the pet store, they're like I'm just thinking you do get like hooves and hides and that to allow the dog to chew on, or the cat. They're not considered a part of the raw pet food.
I would only go for those chews if they had simply been dehydrated at low temperature. Okay. Yeah. And if you can't work out how they were produced, forget it. Okay. So there's great, it's big business these days. You can get some really nice fish skin chews. You can get fish little sprats, the size of my little finger. They're amazing, and basically they've just been dried. So all that goodness, all that unadulterated nutrition is there for you, as opposed to using treats. I'm not going to mention any brand names, but you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, these treats. So if you've got a box of biscuit tea treats at home, just do yourself a favor. Open the window, grab the box, throw the treat out the window. Okay, it is rubbish. You wouldn't eat this processed stuff just as have it as a treat. It's not a treat. It's death food, I think. Use real treats. Dehydrated treats is the way to go. And you can, within reason, you can treat all you like. I'm not against treats. I'm just against hyper-processed, high-carb, additive-laden diets, as many people are.
Yeah, that's why I was just asking more about these hides and hooves and things, these chews, because I did think, are they more like your treats for your pets, because they get to chew on it, bury it, and play with it, and that's a treat for them.
Yeah, I love it. It is totally a treat. But if it's seen any additives, if it's seen any heat, don't touch it. Okay, if it's just dehydrated, great.
Okay. That's a great tip for pet owners listening. When they speak to the pet food shop, they can ask, is this a dehydrated form of it or not? So, yeah. Okay. And then when you were talking about the species, I'd be interested, have you found any difference between small dogs, big dogs, certain kinds of cats, when it comes to this way of eating too for the animals?
Small dogs, big dogs? Not really, because they all come from a similar genetic background. They've just been bred to be tiny, like a Chihuahua, or enormous, like a Saint Bernard, Saint Bernard for our American friends. But they're all from the same gene pool. They've got similar dental structure. They've got similar lack of amylase in the saliva, which is a big clue not to feed high carb foods. They've got similar pancreatic enzyme profiles, similar short gut length, which is typical of a carnivore. So really, size doesn't make an awful lot of difference in terms of nutrient profile. The only difference would be with a small dog, you're not going to give a great big dinosaur bone like this. Because just not going to be able to get their teeth around it. So for the smaller dog, you're going to be thinking chicken wings, turkey necks, turkey duck necks, and what have you. Smaller bones, maybe lamb rib, something like this. Yeah, simply because Chihuahua mouth is like this, whereas for the St. Bernard, you've got St. Bernard mouth is like this, and so pretty much you can give any size bone. You can give small, bony, chewy material to those guys because it can just go straight down. Some St. Bernards I know don't even swallow. It'll just go straight in. And also Pyrenees, Danes, and what have you. It just goes straight down. With the medium-sized dogs, classically a Staffy, they're the ones you just have to be a little bit careful of feeding bony material. And I would always try and feed something really pretty big. Okay. When I'm introducing bony material to a dog for that initial period, when they've just transferred over from kibble for the first month or so, I will not feed any bony material. Yeah. They'll be getting all the bone from ground bone within the mince. Yeah. The producer will have ground bone and mince together. So they'll be getting a bone, but they're not getting anything to clean their teeth. I will then bring them on to eating turkey carcasses, chicken carcasses, the softer bony material. They'll then graduate to vertebrae, to ribs, to sternum, things like this of lamb or beef or venison. And then only when I would consider them a veteran, when they've been eating raw food and they've kind of graduated through the smaller, softer bones to the slightly larger, slightly harder bones. Only at that stage would I consider giving them leg bones, which tend to be quite big and quite brittle. Only when they've cut their teeth, literally on the simpler chews, would I go to marrow bones. Whereas what happens is the common perception is that, oh, my dog needs a bone, let's go and get a marrow bone from the butcher or from the pet shop. And I would suggest that's not a great idea because they're very brittle. Okay, and one of the things that one has to say when it comes to bony material is that it has to be raw. Never, ever, ever, ever. There are very few black and white rules within raw food, but one of them is don't feed raw bone. Don't feed cooked bones to your dog or your cat because they become very brittle and they can splinter and either cause penetrating injury or can because they're less digestible, they can cause blockages within the gut.
That makes
it's much.
I love that because
that's what I'm saying. Raw is the way. Always raw, never cooked.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never actually thought about that because you're always taught or always told, okay, if you've cooked chicken for yourselves for dinner and don't give the bones to the cat because it's going to choke on it. Yet what I mentioned earlier where the cat has gone and caught the pigeon and eaten everything, it's kind of like, why did the bones of the pigeon get stuck in the cat, but the cooked chicken bones will get stuck in the cat? And you've just explained it.
There you go. And all this stuff is really, really straightforward. But you just have to kind of just think about it because very subtly we have been uh, we have been brainwashed by the food manufacturers and through just things that you hear as a kid and uh, these messages that come through. One has to sort the truth from the myth, if you like. And so, and that's to a certain extent, that's why this journey is a very exciting one, because you just I find that every day I'm learning new things about how dogs and cats eat, how just different perceptions of nutrition. It's fantastic. It's a whole new world, and it's easy, and B, the advantages are really easy to see even within 2 weeks. That has been the driving force behind the raw food revolution. Yeah, if it took a year to see actually any improvement with a raw food diet, people would just they say, "Oh, we'll just go back to the kibble. Why not?" But it doesn't. It takes probably about 2 weeks, sometimes even just 3 days. I've had dogs come to see me who've not had a decent stool for their entire life. 3 days later, I have owner on the phone in tears saying, "Charlie's just had a perfect poo." And it makes my day. Seriously, it's absolutely glorious, because you've just revolutionized that dog's life and that owner's life. And you can see it there in front of you. You don't need biochemical tests. You don't need to analyze the microbiome. It's there.
I love that. Just a couple of last questions then too. I when I was trying to do my research just to see what some other things people would be asking was, I guess, the difference between a house pet and maybe a pet that gets to be outdoors a lot. Some people I think are asking, is it okay to feed a cat who only lives in a house, or a dog who lives up in an apartment, in a high-rise, raw food?
I haven't got a problem at all. I raised 2 children with a dog and a cat, both who ate raw food. Different people have different aversion or to having bones in the house. I haven't got a problem. We've got a kind of a stone floor in the kitchen that can just be cleaned every day. It's not a problem. The cat will chew chicken wings on the floor in the utility room out the back, and we just clean it and off we go. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but you know what? I think once people see those improvements, Gary, they're going to go, this is a very small price to pay. Obviously you're not going to drag in a carcass, you're not going to drag in a roadkill and stick it on your best carpet in your Kensington apartment and let the dog and cat demolish it. That's not going to happen. But within reason, it's more than easy for just ordinary people to, in a very hygienic way, feed raw food realistically in a kind of species appropriate delivery, i.e. things to chew. It's easy to do. And I think if you're inquiring about how can I best feed myself, I think it behoves you to at least look into the whole raw food thing. That's for sure.
Great. So I guess the sort of the gist there is, for any pet owners who live in these apartments, the growing raw isn't more messy and it's not more smelly in a way for their apartment.
It's probably more messy because if you've got a dog who's got on the formica in the kitchen, there's going to be there might be something on there, but there are ways around it. You could put it in a low card plastic box and just say, and you teach the dog that's where you eat the bone, off you go. I guess most people don't, but that's a possibility. You can always just wipe up after the dog, and with the cat you just say, right, cat has turkey necks in the kitchen, that's it. And cat pretty rapidly learns. They don't get a hard time if they eat in the kitchen. They get a very hard time if they go out of the kitchen with this, this turkey neck dribbling from their mouth. It's families work together. That's how it's give and take. It's give and take, and the dog and the cat, they're part of the family, so it's give and take on their part as well.
Well, Nick, I just want to say thank you so much for all your practical tips today. I'm loving that, and I'm hoping everyone who's listening to this, who's either considering moving their pet onto raw pet food or is currently trying to do it, and they've got some of these questions, I'm sure they're loving these tips that you're sharing today. I think you've answered so many great questions just to highlight to someone why they would want to do it and practically how they do it, and that's taking theory into practice again, which I love. So this is the time when I usually ask, are there any particular ways online that people can either keep in contact with you personally or any recommendations that you would like to suggest to people to follow at this point?
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so my website is holisticvet.co.uk, holisticvet.co.uk, holisticvet.co.uk. You can find all the information there, and there are articles and lots of stuff about vaccination and many things. So please help yourself. The Raw Feeding Veterinary Society is rfvs.info, and so there are articles there. If you're a vet or a vet nurse or a vet tech, then please come and join us. This is a wonderful journey, and we would love to have you along. We're having a conference, an international conference in Manchester in the UK on the 10th of November. And so if any vet professionals or any dog professionals, breeders, trainers, if you'd like to come along and join the conversation, then we're having a conference. It's easy to get to, and it's inexpensive. So we'd really love to see you there. Gary, you're very welcome. You're in the Isle of Man. So yeah, come fly over, come and see us, and come and join the conversation. Please, you're very welcome. Recommendations, I've given you a book list. There are book lists on the website as well. On my Amazon pages, if you find me, Nick Thompson is me. There are book lists as well. But yeah, email me, nickThompson@holisticvet.co.uk. Email me, and always really happy to talk about food, which is what I do. We talk about food all day. What a great job. What a great job.
Well, Nick, I'm sure there might be some listeners here who are, either going all the way from Australia to, Scandinavia to North America somewhere. And if they've got a couple of questions or they want to consult, they can contact you through those points. So, and I'll link all of that in the show notes for listeners. So again, just thank you so much for your time, for sharing all your knowledge and your practical tips. It's been very useful.
Anytime, Gary. I'd love to come and talk to you again if you want.